Imagine a man who has lost everything: his wealth, his home, his position, perhaps even the respect of those he once called friends. Most people would look at such a man and say, he is poor. Yet Niccolò Machiavelli, the sharpest mind of Renaissance politics, would see something else entirely. He would say, poverty is not a matter of coins or comfort, but of spirit. The truly poor man is not the one who owns nothing, it is the one who believes. He has nothing left to give. Machiavelli's world was one of shifting alliances, sudden betrayals, and ruthless ambition. He saw princes rise from nothing and kings fall from everything. From these scenes, he learned one unbreakable truth: fortune changes, but strength of mind endures. A person who keeps his wits, who maintains his dignity and resourcefulness even in ruin, is never truly poor. When you lose your possessions, you lose things that can be replaced. When you lose your confidence, your purpose, your cunning, you lose everything. Machiavelli would tell us that the world respects power, and power does not always come from wealth or rank. It comes from the mastery of one's own mind. Even when stripped of all else, the person who refuses to think like a victim, who refuses to bow to despair, remains rich in potential. Consider this: a prince who inherits his throne may sit on gold, but if he cannot think clearly, he will lose it all. Meanwhile, a man in rags, armed with vision and discipline, can shape his own fate. Fortune, in Machiavelli's eyes, is a river that floods without warning. The wise man builds levees long before the storm. Those levees are built from intellect, courage, and adaptability, not from coins in the chest. Never think you are poor simply because your pockets are empty. Poverty of the mind is far more dangerous than poverty of circumstance. When you believe you are powerless, you make it true. But when you believe you can rise, when you see every setback as a lesson, you already possess something priceless: the mindset of a ruler. Machiavelli admired those who could take control of chaos, who could turn misfortune into opportunity. That kind of wealth cannot be stolen, taxed, or destroyed. Let us look at Machiavelli himself. After years of serving the Florentine Republic, he was dismissed, imprisoned, and tortured. Everything he had worked for vanished. Yet he did not collapse into self-pity and exile. He began to write The Prince, the book that would make his name immortal. From humiliation, he carved wisdom. From powerlessness, he forged influence. He had nothing, and yet he created something that shaped the minds of rulers for centuries. If you believe that your worth depends on what you own, then fortune is your master. But if you learn to see yourself as the master of your own mind, then you rule even when you serve. Machiavelli's philosophy teaches that every human being has a kind of internal sovereignty. You can lose your job, your home, your status, but if you still command your thoughts, your discipline, your cunning, you remain a prince in the realm of your own life. He might whisper to you, never beg fortune for mercy. Make her your adversary, your teacher. When she strikes you down, rise sharper. When she strips you bare, clothe yourself in resolve. The poorest man who still dares to plan, to think, to act, he is richer than the idle heir who squanders his inheritance. Even when you have nothing, you have time, you have will, you have imagination. Those are the tools by which every empire was built. History is filled with people who started with nothing but the fire of belief. Machiavelli would say, use the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. Do not curse misfortune. Study it, outwit it. Turn every defeat into an education. To think you are poor is to surrender before the battle begins. It is to let the world decide your worth instead of deciding it yourself. Remember that everything visible, money, property, reputation, is temporary. The only true possession is your character, your intelligence, your resilience. When you invest in those, fortune becomes your servant, not your master. In life, the difference between ruin and greatness often lies in how one interprets loss. To the weak, loss is proof of failure. To the strong, it is preparation. Machiavelli believed that struggle is the furnace of strength. When the world takes from you, it also gives you the rare chance to rebuild stronger, smarter, and freer. So, when you find yourself with nothing, do not curse your emptiness, use it. A mind unburdened by possessions is free to imagine, to strategize, to rebuild. That freedom is the soil in which greatness grows. To think you are poor is to blind yourself to that possibility. Never think you are poor, even when you have nothing, because nothing is often the beginning of everything. When stripped of illusions and comfort, you see what truly matters: your capacity to endure, to learn, to act. The man who keeps his pride and intellect intact in hardship is already richer than most, who live in comfort but depend on it. Machiavelli would not tell you to deny reality, he would tell you to master it. If fortune has turned against you, do not weep for what is lost. Plot for what can be gained. The world does not reward complaint. It rewards cunning, courage, and persistence. The poor man who thinks like a ruler will one day find himself treated like one. So hold your head high when life empties your pockets. Look at your circumstances not as punishment, but as preparation. In that moment of apparent defeat, remember Machiavelli's quiet lesson: power begins in perception. As long as you refuse to think you are poor, you never truly are. Even when the world has stripped you of everything you once depended on, your money, your comfort, you're certain that there remains one territory no one can conquer unless you permit it: the empire of your mind. Machiavelli understood that the first step toward power is the refusal to see oneself as powerless. To think you are poor is to surrender your throne before the fight begins. To see yourself as capable, strategic, and unbroken, even in hardship, is to plant the seed of future dominance. He lived in an age where fortune was as unpredictable as the wine kings fell overnight. Republics crumbled. Alliances shifted without warning. Yet he noticed something striking: the survivors, the ones who rose again and again, were not the richest or the most privileged. They were those who adapted, those who treated disaster not as an end, but as information, a setback. In Machiavelli's eyes was simply data proof of how the world worked. He urged us to study it, not lament it. Think of fortune as a wild animal, untamable and dangerous. Most people try to coax it with hope or chase it with desperation. Machiavelli's prince learns to trap it, to bend it, to use its chaos for his advantage. When fortune knocks you down, it also exposes her weaknesses: moments when quick thinking, boldness, or cunning can reverse your position entirely. But if you see yourself as poor, defeated, or unworthy, you'll never seize that chance. You'll wait for mercy instead of creating opportunity. Poverty of mind is the greatest poverty of all, because it blinds you to the levers of power that still lie within reach. You may have lost your income, but not your ability to persuade. You may have lost your status, but not your capacity to think clearly. You may have lost your comfort, but not your courage. The man who knows how to use these invisible assets will always be wealthier than the man who has gold but no wisdom. When Machiavelli was dismissed from his post, accused of conspiracy, and tortured, he could have collapsed into despair. Instead, he withdrew to his humble home and began to read the works of great philosophers, to converse with the dead minds of antiquity. Each night, he put on formal robes as though preparing to meet kings and wrote The Prince. This ritual was not vanity, it was discipline. It was a declaration that his poverty would not define him, that even in exile, he would rule through intellect. He had nothing, no power, no wealth, no comfort, yet through thought, he created influence that outlived every prince he ever advised. This is the power of refusing to think like a beggar. The beggar waits for charity. The strategist builds his fortune from dust. The difference between them lies not in resources, but in the story they tell themselves. If you believe you are poor, you begin to act like it, hesitant, timid, desperate for approval. But when you see yourself as powerful, even if the world calls you nothing, your decisions change. You act with purpose. You calculate instead of complain, and slowly, the world adjusts to that vision. People follow those who seem sure of their direction, even if they start from ruin. Machiavelli's lesson is simple, but severe. The world does not pity weakness, it respects resolve. So, when you lose what you thought defined you, ask yourself, what remains? If all you have left is your will, your mind, your capacity to plan, then you have more than enough. Greatness often begins in deprivation. Hunger sharpens the intellect. Hardship teaches strategy. Solitude breeds reflection. Comfort rarely produces visionaries, it produces caretakers of what already exists. But crisis creates creators. To never think you're poor is not about denying reality, it's about claiming control over how to interpret it. You can look at an empty field and see barrenness, or you can see the soil of a future harvest. The choice determines what you do next. Those who believe they are poor stop planning. Those who see potential begin building. Remember this: wealth is a tool, not a virtue. Status is temporary, not sacred. If you let them define you, they will also destroy you when they vanish. But if you define yourself by your adaptability, your intelligence, and your endurance, then every loss becomes fuel. Machiavelli would say, he who knows how to fall does not fear being pushed, because every fall is a rehearsal for the next rise. So, when fortune turns her face from you, do not beg her to return. smile, learn, and adapt. Become so skillful that she cannot resist coming back. Build strength so quietly, so intelligently, that when opportunity rises, you are ready, not bitter, not broken, but sharp. That readiness is true wealth. Never think you are poor, even when you have nothing, because nothing is often the clearest mirror of who you really are. When stripped of luxury, what remains is your essence, your discipline, your courage, your intelligence. Those who cultivate these when they have nothing will command them when they have everything. The world may take your gold, your comfort, your applause, but it cannot take your capacity to think, to decide, to act. As long as you can think, you can plan. As long as you can plan, you can rise. That is Machiavelli's quiet truth. The throne is always available to those who dare to claim it, not with money, but with mastery. So carry yourself as though you own your fate, not because of arrogance, but because that belief alone gives you power. Speak and act like someone who has not been defeated, even when the world believes you have. For in that moment, you are already winning. You are proving that true wealth is not in possession, but in perception. When everything around you crumbles and the world begins to whisper that you have failed, that is the very moment Machiavelli would urge you to listen most closely, not to those voices, but to your own, because that is the moment when the illusion of security is torn away and what remains is truth. What are you, without your titles, without your comfort, without your applause? Most men, he would say, spend their lives avoiding that question. But those who face it, who look into the mirror of loss and say, I am still here, those are the ones who will rule again. Machiavelli understood that life is not a constant ascent. It is a cycle of fortune rising, falling, and rising again. Those who mistake their rise for permanence are the ones destroyed by their fall. Those who prepare for the fall, who study its patterns, who accept its inevitability, they endure. So when fortune abandons you, do not curse her, thank her, for she has revealed what kind of person you are when the mask of wealth is stripped away. Never thinking you ray poor does not mean pretending you ray rich. It means recognizing that your power does not depend on what others give you, but on what you can create. It is a rebellion of the spirit against dependency. The man who says, I am not poor, even when empty-handed, is not delusional, he is defiant. He refuses to let the world define his value through external measures. That defiance is strength, and strength, in Machiavelli's world, is everything. He would remind us that poverty has broken many men not because of hunger, but because of humiliation. It is not the lack of food that destroys the soul, but the belief that one is less worthy than others. Machiavelli's remedy to this humiliation is pride, not the arrogant pride that blinds, but the disciplined pride that sustains. It is the conviction that even stripped bare, you remain formidable. There is a kind of nobility that comes only in hardship. A man who has tasted loss and still walks upright commands a deeper respect than one who has never been tested. The courtier may laugh at the beggar, but Machiavelli would study the beggar's endurance. He would see in him the raw material of greatness, for when you have nothing to lose, you become dangerous, not reckless, but free, free from fear, free from the need to please, free from the illusions that bind most people. The fear of poverty enslaves more people than poverty itself. It makes them obedient, cautious, dependent. But the one who no longer fears being poor becomes untouchable. That, Machiavelli would say, is real freedom, the kind no ruler can grant or take away. And remember this, the world's structure favors the bold. People admire wealth, yes, but they follow confidence. They submit to decisiveness. A man who walks into a room with nothing but conviction can outshine a man dripping with gold. Why? Because conviction cannot be bought. It is the currency of the powerful. Even kings, in their secret hearts, envy the one who needs nothing, because to need nothing is to be beyond manipulation. Machiavelli saw this clearly. The prince who depends on fortune lives in constant fear of her departure. But the man who depends on his own faculties, his intellect, his endurance, he is invulnerable to her whims. When you have lost everything, you stand at a rare intersection between despair and liberation. You can crumble or you can rebuild without the weight of your past. Many of the greatest leaders began at such intersections. They did not rise because they were chosen, but because they refused to be forgotten. When others looked at ruins, they saw resources. When others cried injustice, they quietly drew plans. This is not romantic optimism. Machiavelli was no dreamer. He was cold, realistic, often ruthless in his observations. And yet even he, the cynic of Florence, saw an indestructible power in the human mind. He wrote not to flatter the powerful, but to remind them how fragile power is and how it can always be reclaimed by those who dare to understand it. To think you are poor is to surrender the throne of your own life. You hand over your dignity, your creativity, your authority to circumstance. But when you refuse that surrender, when you say, I will build again, I will learn again, I will rule again, you have already begun your return. Every great recovery starts in that silent moment of defiance. So, when the world calls you poor, answer with action. When it calls you defeated, answer with resilience. When it calls you forgotten, answer with creation. The greatest revenge against misfortune is not bitterness, it is success built from the ruins she left behind. Never think you are poor, because poverty is only a condition when you stop creating. As long as you are thinking, planning, and daring, you are already richer than most. The treasures of the mind, clarity, discipline, courage grow in the soil of adversity. Every challenge you face is secretly a lesson in how to rule yourself, and self-mastery is the foundation of all other power. So let others chase comfort. Let them fear loss. You, instead, cultivate the art of standing firm in chaos. Let them define wealth by what they own. You define it by what you can endure and transform. When you master that, fortune itself becomes your instrument. And if someday you rise again, and you will, remember what the emptiness taught you, that no coin is as valuable as cunning, no title as steady as willpower, and no possession as enduring as the belief that you were never truly poor even when the world thought you were. That is the wisdom Machiavelli left us, not the cold heart of a manipulator, but the burning truth of a realist. You are rich the moment you stop waiting for permission to be powerful. You are strong the moment you refuse to see yourself as weak. You are never poor when your mind still dares to dream, to plan, to fight. When the night grows darkest and the noise of the world fades into silence, it is then that a person truly confronts themselves. No distractions, no praise, no possessions, only the echo of their own thoughts. That silence can feel like a void, but to Machiavelli, it was not emptiness. It was the birthplace of strength, because when everything external is stripped away, what remains is pure substance, the mind, the will, and the unyielding instinct to endure. Never think you are poor when life seems to have reduced you to nothing. Nothing is the raw material from which every creation begins. The painter starts with a blank canvas. The general begins with an empty battlefield. The philosopher begins with a question. So must you begin with nothing, because it is in that nothingness that possibility hides. To call yourself poor is to close the door to that possibility. To call yourself prepared is to open it wide. Machiavelli would remind us that fortune does not respect weakness, but she is fascinated by strength. She tests the strong not to destroy them, but to refine them. The storms that ruin fragile ships make seasoned captains. The same flood that drowns the careless farmer nourishes the field of the wise one who has built his levees. In this way, hardship is not the enemy, it is the measure of how well you have prepared your mind. There is a certain dignity in the man who, though beaten, still plans. Picture him, sitting in the ruins of his fortunes, sketching on scraps of paper, eyes sharp with intent. The world calls him delusional, but Machiavelli would call him dangerous, because while others are grieving what they lost, he is already plotting what comes next. He has refused to think of himself as poor, and that single refusal becomes his rebellion against fate itself. The greatest wealth a person can possess is the ability to see advantage and disadvantage. That is what separates those who wait for luck from those who create it. Even in misery, there are levers of opportunity, small openings for those alert enough to see them. To think you are poor blinds you to those openings. But when you see every difficulty as data, as Machiavelli did, then no situation is hopeless. Every misfortune becomes a map. We live in a world obsessed with appearances, money, titles, prestige. But these are fragile currencies. They rise and fall with public opinion, with the markets, with time. The true currency of power is perception, especially the perception you hold of yourself. The moment you believe you are poor, you begin to move as if you are, to speak as if you are, to expect less from life. And in doing so, you fulfill your own prophecy. Machiavelli teaches the opposite. Act as though fortune is your equal, not your master. Speak as though you already command what you seek. Behave as though power is something that flows through you, not something you must beg for. The world bends toward those who project certainty, even in uncertainty. When you think and act as though you are rich in spirit, the world begins to reflect that image back to you. Look to the lessons of history. Every empire began with a person who dared to think beyond their circumstances. Rome was once a cluster of huts, Florence a river village. Greatness is not inherited, It is constructed, and it is always constructed first in the mind. Poverty of imagination is the true ruin of humanity, not lack of resources. The man who says, "I cannot," becomes his own jailer. The man who says, "I will find a way," breaks every chain. Even when fortune crushes you, she also offers you the rare gift of clarity. When you have nothing, you see who your real allies are. You see what you truly value. You learn what cannot be taken from you. That knowledge is pure gold. It cannot be spent, but it can buy back your future 100-fold. And when you rebuild, as all who persist eventually do not forget the lesson of your fall. Never become so attached to your new comfort that you fear its loss. The moment you begin to fear being poor, you have become poor again, not in fact, but in spirit. Keep your independence sharp. Remember that fortune's favor is temporary, but your capacity to adapt is eternal. Machiavelli's wisdom was never meant only for princes, it was meant for all who wish to master themselves. His words remind us that every man is a ruler within his own mind, and every woman a strategist of her own destiny. Wealth, after all, is not a number, it is the measure of how well you command your reality. So, when life reduces you to your essence, do not despair. Stand tall amid the ruins. If you have courage, you have more than gold. If you have discipline, you have more than power. If you have vision, you already possess the seed of empire. Tell yourself this truth every time fortune tests you. I am not poor. I am being prepared. The world belongs to those who think this way. Because the poor in mind wait for the storm to pass, but the strong learn to sail in it. And someday, when you rise again, and you will look back on this moment, this emptiness, this so-called poverty, and you will understand it was not the end of your story, but the beginning of your reign. There comes a moment in every life when the world feels stripped of mercy, when the walls that once sheltered you crumble, and even your shadow feels like a stranger. It is in this moment, Machiavelli would say, that true character is forged. For comfort hides weakness, but hardship reveals strength. And when the illusions fall away, when all that remains is your bare will to continue, you discover the truth. You were never poor. You were simply being refined. To never think you're poor, even when you have nothing, is not arrogance, it's awareness. It is the recognition that value begins in the mind, not in the market. A man who knows how to think, how to plan, how to endure, he carries within him the architecture of fortune. The poor man, by contrast, may live surrounded by abundance, but see only limitation, poverty. Machiavelli would say, is blindness disguised as humility. He would tell you to look at your situation, not as ruin, but as preparation. The loss of wealth teaches prudence. The loss of comfort teaches strength. The loss of status teaches independence. Fortune, in her cruelty, is often your best teacher, for she strips away what is unnecessary until you are left only with what is essential. And what is essential is unbreakable. Remember that everything external is borrowed. Titles, possessions, applause. These things belong to fortune, and she can reclaim them whenever she pleases. But the mind that studies, the will that persists, the soul that refuses surrender, those belong to you alone. They are your true inheritance, and they grow stronger each time fortune tests you. Machiavelli might have put it this way: the world admires the man who rises, but it secretly belongs to the man who endures. Because ignorance is power in its purest form, it is power that cannot be stolen, only earned. When fortune turns her back on you, do not curse her, bow slightly. Thank her for revealing who you are, and continue your work. That calm defiance is the mark of a ruler, even if you sleep tonight under no roof. Never let your circumstances speak louder than your intention. When you begin to think you are poor, you unconsciously seek pity, and pity is poison. It softens the will, weakens the focus, and makes you believe that your story depends on someone else's generosity. Machiavelli would remind you, no prince was ever made by pity. He would tell you to replace it with pride, quiet, disciplined pride that asks nothing but the opportunity to prove itself. Every person, no matter how fallen, has at least one weapon left: choice. You can choose how to see your suffering. You can choose to treat it as destruction or as material. If you treat it as material, you begin to build. The ruins around you are not just evidence of what was lost, they are stones waiting to be rearranged. Your life, even at its lowest point, is a construction site for greatness. History remembers those who refuse to think small in the face of disaster. Machiavelli himself, ruined by politics, disgraced and exiled, wrote The Prince, a book born not of power, but of its absence. He turned his defeat into a manual of triumph. He could not command armies or govern a city, but he could command ideas, and in doing so, He achieved a form of immortality that no throne could grant. There is a lesson there. You may lose the ability to act in the world, but you never lose the ability to think about it. And thought, sharpened by hardship, becomes strategy. Strategy, executed with patience, becomes power. Power, once reclaimed, makes you free. This is the alchemy of the mind, the transformation of pain into wisdom and wisdom into dominance. Even when you stand alone, you are not empty. You are surrounded by invisible wealth, the strength of your memories, the lessons of your failures, the resilience you did not know you possessed. Those are treasures no thief can steal. And when you finally rise again, and rise you will, find yourself richer than before, not in possessions, but in insight. You will know how to build without fear, how to win without arrogance, how to lose without despair. To think you are poor is to live in comparison, to measure yourself against the illusions of others. But Machiavelli's wisdom frees you from that comparison. He would tell you, do not ask what others have, ask what they depend on. If they depend on wealth, they are slaves to fortune. If they depend on comfort, they are slaves to fear. But if you depend only on your own mind, you are free in every kingdom, even when you own nothing. There is a peculiar kind of richness that belongs only to those who have suffered. It is the richness of understanding, the ability to see through pretenses, to detect weakness behind gold, to recognize false strength for what it is. This insight is priceless. The powerful fear it, because it cannot be bought. The wise treasure it, because it cannot be lost. So, when you find yourself with nothing, do not rush to escape that state. Stay there for a moment. Listen. Learn what it feels like to be free from expectation, free from illusion. That stillness, that emptiness, is not poverty. It is the silence before creation. It is the deep breath before a new beginning. Machiavelli would whisper that the greatest art of power is patience. Do not demand that fortune return too soon. Let her wander. While she is gone, refine yourself. Study, plan, build alliances quietly. When she comes back, and she always does, meet her not as a beggar, but as an equal. Let her see that her absence has made you more dangerous, not more desperate. And when others see you walking calmly through loss, unshaken, they will not call you poor, they will call you mysterious. They will wonder what secret you possess that lets you endure what would have broken them. That secret is simple. You never believed that fortune defined you. You always knew that power comes not from what you own, but from what you are willing to become. That, above all, is the essence of Machiavellian strength, to rule yourself first, so that no one and nothing can truly rule you. To see in every fall the foundation of a future throne. To stand amid ruin and say, without arrogance, but with absolute certainty, I am not poor, I am becoming. And when you carry that truth with you, when you walk with the quiet confidence of one who has learned to turn loss into leverage, the world eventually will bend to meet your stride. Because fortune may favor the bold, but she kneels before the unbreakable.